Welcome to the Slam Harris podcast, where we tear up this turd of a tome page by painful page. I'm your host, Dr. Trent Doherty. We're starting right now. All right, let's jump right into chapter 1. Shall we? Yes, we shall. He starts out very literarily with a story. The young man boards the bus as it leaves the terminal. He wears an overcoat. Seems kind of sketchy to me. Beneath his overcoat, he is wearing a bomb. See, told you, don't trust people with overcoats. His pockets are filled with nails, ball bearings, and rat poison. Doesn't say what size nails, whether 16 penny nails, finished nails. Doesn't say what size the ball bearings are, anything like that, but doesn't matter. The bus is crowded and headed for the heart of the city. The young man takes his seat beside a middle-aged couple. He will wait for the bus to reach its next stop. The couple at his side appears to be shopping for a new refrigerator. On a bus? How do you shop? They got like a refrigerator catalog on the bus? That's a little weird. The woman has decided on a model, but her husband worries that it'll be too expensive. No stereotypes there. It goes on and on. Story goes on. Story goes on. Story goes on. Guess what? It explodes. Ball bearings go everywhere. Rat poison goes everywhere. And when the young man's parents learn of his fate, although saddened by the loss of their son, they feel a tremendous sense of pride at his accomplishment. They know that he has gone to heaven and prepared the way to follow. He's also sent his victims to hell for eternity. And goes on and on. Okay. Then, after that lovely little story that occupies almost all of the first page, he says, "These are the facts." I'm like, these are the facts? This is a story that you made up. Like, it's a fact. Like, how did you know that? Was this a real couple? How did you know she picked a model? Like, that's just creepy, man. And one of the statements is, he also sent his victims to hell for eternity. That's a fact. So, Sam Harris believes in an eternal hell? Interesting. Didn't realize that. So, I don't know what... I assume he's trying to say something like that things like this occur is a fact. Or that these are the facts. These are things like facts. There are facts like this. But that's just pretty bad writing right there. But so page 1 is a story, so have to be literary critic there, not logic critic. Now he does ask the question on the next page, page 12, is there anything else that we can infer about this man on the basis of his behavior? Was he popular in school? Was he rich or poor? Did he have a college education? Did he have a bright future as a mechanical engineer? Then, avows Sam Harris, his behavior is simply mute on questions of this sort. No, it's not. For his behavior to be mute on questions of that sort, they have to be literally probabilistically independent, meaning they neither confirm nor disconfirm those propositions to any non-zero degree whatsoever. And that's implausible. The only way that could be true would be if there were literally an exact same number of people distributed about each part of the partition. And that's a ridiculous thing to even claim. No citation on the stats there. Now, Sam Harris, from listening to his podcast, I've listened to many dozens of hours of podcasts by Sam Harris, and he likes to point out that some of these terrorists are rich, well-educated, some come from the West, have good lives, things like that. Sure, that happens. But it's not the norm, nor is it probabilistically independent from these actions. So he's got a weird use of the word facts on the very first page after his little story. Now he seems just confused about the nature of probability. Not a great start. Okay, but it's easy to guess the man's religion. Well, fair enough. He goes on to talk about belief, which is supposed to be his professional expertise. Okay, so at the time of writing, he was completing a doctorate in neuroscience, studying the neural basis of belief, disbelief, and uncertainty. Now, I like that kind of stuff. I could dig that. love to talk to the Sam on those topics. But it's weird because if he studied belief, this other statement is seemingly off base. Okay, a belief is a lever that, once pulled, moves almost everything else in a person's life. It's not too far off. Are you a scientist, a liberal, a racist? These are merely species of belief in action. It's not merely that. I mean, you're not a scientist just because of your beliefs. You're not a liberal or a racist just because of your beliefs. So you're a scientist. Most people I know that are scientists, it started with desire. It started with the fact that they loved studying nature. Or as Aristotle says in the opening lines of the Metaphysics, all men by nature desire to know. Maybe it's just sheer curiosity. Aristotle says philosophy begins in wonder. And that's not a belief, that's an affective state. So he goes on to say, this supposed expert on the nature of belief, your beliefs define your vision of the world. They dictate your behavior. Well, they don't dictate your behavior. It's like he's never read Aristotle, the idea of the practical syllogism, that it's belief and desire together. Hume had a different view than Aristotle on this, but they still all held that there was a cognitive and affective state together that determined your action. If I believed that the stuff in here was poison and I desired to live and slake my thirst, I wouldn't drink it. If I believed it was poison and desired to die, I would drink it. If I desired to die and thought and believed it was water, I wouldn't drink it. So it's belief and desire together, or more generally, some sort of cognitive state and affective state together that determine behavior, or at least set the course of behavior on its path. But he says, continuing that sentence, they determine your emotional responses. No, they don't. Sometimes your emotional responses determine your beliefs. Okay? Like, I don't know. Like if you're terrified of religion and you're scared to death there might be a higher power that can judge you and hold you accountable, you might end up believing there ain't no such thing. Pretty comforting. Basically, as an aside, I think atheism is sort of a metaphysical Oedipal complex in which the childlike mind is jealous of Father God and wishes to ravish Mother Earth and technological development. But that's a story for another day. So real confusion about the nature of belief here. Real confusion about the nature of belief here. He goes on to say that beliefs determine your desires, fears, expectations, and subsequent behavior. No, they don't. No, they don't. They can influence it, and the influence can go the other way too. It's a two-way street. This is fundamental. This is basic. This is 101. This is embarrassing for him to even say things like this. Much less as a person who claims to have some expertise in the nature of belief. Okay, page 13 at the top. Our situation is this, says Sam. Most of the people in this world believe that the creator of the universe has written a book. Wrong. Almost nobody believes that. Certainly not Christians. Even fairly naive Christians understand that God didn't just sit down and write a book out. Almost no Christian of any sophistication that I've met in my lifetime believes in some sort of dictation view or anything like it. The Christian with even the slightest familiarity of the composition of the New Testament understands that there were many authors, and they might be puzzled about, in fact, 100 to 1, for every one person who has this weird like dictation view of the Bible, there are 100 that are actually like troubled by the idea of, well, how did God even get his thoughts in there? Because the Bible was written by people. I mean, they actually sat down and wrote the stuff down. So did God inspire their thoughts, or, what happened there? That's, as somebody who's taught in Christian schools for 20 years, that's what I've encountered again and again. And that's a good, reasonable question that demands a good answer. But you almost never run into people, even the little kids, not even like practically like fundamentalist little kids, is about how far down you got to go before you get the Sam Harris concept of God wrote a book. So, wrong. It is not the case that most of the people in the world believe that the creator of the universe has just written a book. totally ridiculous way of stating that. Now, Islam, it's a little different. The Quran was more like dictated according to that story, but certainly not the Old Testament. And there are certainly more Christians and Jews combined than there are Muslims. And Bhagavad Gita doesn't claim that for itself. Not the Dhammapada, Tao Te Ching, the Analects. So this is it's just a false statement that wouldn't even survive 15 seconds on Wikipedia. Next sentence. We have the misfortune of having many such books on hand, each making an exclusive claim as to its infallibility. What's an ambiguous statement? Does he mean that they each claim to have the exclusive truth about a particular domain, or do they each exclusively claim to be infallible? Now, presumably the New Testament counts as a holy book, one hopes, and it does not make an exclusive claim to infallibility because it accepts that for, or some version of that for, the Old Testament as well, the Hebrew Scriptures. So I don't know if he's just trying to lump the Hebrew and Christian Scriptures together under one heading, but that's silly. So, as stated, that's just wrong. Going on, people tend to organize themselves into factions according to which of these incompatible claims they accept, rather than on the basis of language, skin color, location of birth, or any other criterion of tribalism. Yeah, in other words, religion transcends race and class and provides a great deal of unity for the people that follow it. So thanks for admitting that, Sam. Appreciate that. Each of these texts urges its readers to adopt a variety of beliefs and practices, some of which are benign, many of which are not. All are in perverse agreement on one point of fundamental importance, however, wait for it, respect for other faiths or for the views of unbelievers is not an attitude that God endorses. Let's get that quote up there, please. Somewhere right in here. Thank you. That's just a dumb thing to say, because there's even, when I was working on the book Answering Islam with Norm Geisler, gosh, in like 1990, we read the Quran. His research assistants all read the Quran from beginning to end with 8 or 9 or 10 different categories. And when we would find a quote in that category, we would photocopy it and like code it for that topic, and then put it in a folder so that we would end up with a series of folders full of quotes from the Quran on that topic. So that way we could go back and reference those. And there is no doubt that the Quran talks about the people of the book and issues respect for all the people of the book. Now, it might he might say it contradicts that in other places. Okay, fine. It's not my problem. But it does issue respect for people of other faiths. And like, that's fundamental. Like, oh yeah, that's really important. If it was really fundamental to all these faiths, why not a quote, Sam? Why not a quote? Why not one effing quote? This is just a bunch of assertions piled up one on top of another like a bunch of skinny, thin, lame-ass pancakes. Okay, that's nonsense, that's nonsense, that's nonsense. Okay, moving on. While all faiths have been touched here and there by the spirit of ecumenism, he actually says ecumenicalism, but it's ecumenism. Sorry, I know that's kind of a hard word, but the central tenet, God, I can hardly even read this. The central tenet of every religious tradition is that all others are mere repositories of error, or at best, dangerously incomplete. All right, let's get that quote up here. All right, thanks. I mean, this is like the idea of a religion. It's like it's, I just got to like the central tenet, like the definite article, the central tenet, not a consequence of, or one of the most unfortunate consequences of, but no, the central tenet of every religious tradition. He's so categorical. By the way, in terms of just general philosophical scrutiny, when you find people just continually making categorical propositions using all and every and none and those sorts of words a lot, be suspicious. You don't have a careful thinker there. So guess what? Wrong. That is not the case, because there is overlap between, obviously, Christianity and Judaism, Islam and Christianity, Islam and Judaism. They disagree on some pretty important parts. But the central tenet of Christianity is that Jesus Christ is the Messiah, the second person of the Holy Trinity, who became incarnate in Jesus of Nazareth, had a sacrificial death, rose again for our salvation to overcome sin. Puzzling story, that. I'll grant you that. You're not going to find me hiding from that. It's kind of an odd little story. Makes you wonder how that all works. And that's why we have theology. And there are lots of puzzles about that. It's not, to me, I wasn't raised a Christian, so it's not like that made sense to me right off the bat. But if you're patient, and if you're open-minded and tolerant, and you can just sit still and listen to the explanations, there are good explanations. Now we get to something that is part of, again, his alleged specialty. So in the back of the book, Sam Harris is a graduate, blah, 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 blah. He is now completing a doctorate in neuroscience, studying the neural basis of belief, disbelief, and uncertainty. And hopefully that involves some certainty in there too. And he says this: certainty about the next life is simply incompatible with tolerance in this one. Why would anybody need to be certain about the next life? He doesn't give any justification whatsoever for believers needing to have certainty. It's almost all he talks about is belief. And so by implication here, it seems like he believes that belief requires certainty. But that's obvious nonsense. No remotely educated philosopher who had even the most basic freshman acquaintance with doxastic theory, certainly with Bayesian doxastic theory, could be tempted to say such a thing. Because we believe some things with greater certainty than we believe other things. I believe I'm doing a podcast right now with greater certainty than I believe it is after 9 p.m. I think it's after 9 p.m. I believe it is. I'm pretty sure it is, but not nearly as sure as I am that I'm doing a podcast. But I believe in both. Hell, I believe, my middle name is Beep. I don't like my middle name. We'll get there. You'll probably get it out of me. But I was in 8th grade before anybody I went to school with knew my middle name. It's one of those personal things. Anyway, but I'm not certain. Technically, I'm not certain that that's my middle name. It's weird. It's not even like a name. It's hardly a word. So maybe I'm remembering that wrong. Hell, I don't know. Anyway, but I do believe that's my middle name. And I believe it with quite a bit of certainty. But not as much as I believe that, I have lights shining on me right now. So you can take belief, and it can come in all sorts of gradations, degrees of belief, or degrees of certainty combined with belief. So this idea that belief entails certainty is just really messed up. But suppose you were certain about the next life. That's not simply incompatible with tolerance in this one. So the word tolerance is technically ambiguous here. So let's distinguish between extreme tolerance and moderate tolerance. Extreme tolerance might be something like this. You don't even care what people believe. You don't even care what people believe. Do you believe that Jesus is the Son of God? Do you not believe it? Whatever, I don't care. Okay? Yeah, that'd be pretty bad. Just like saying if somebody believed this was, they didn't care whether I believed this was poison or not. That would be rough. But what about moderate tolerance? Just as in look, I'm really sure you're wrong. And therefore, I beg you to consider these propositions. I beg you to listen to this message and consider the evidence. I beg you to reason with me on this. Or with somebody else you think is smarter than me or knows more than me. But I beg you to search desperately into this issue. But if you choose not to, I have to accept that. Is that wrong? Is that a bad way to be? But notice that that's a portrayal, a very accurate portrayal of somebody who is both certain and tolerant. So the idea that certainty about the next life is simply incompatible with tolerance in this one is stupid. It's not just wrong, it's stupid. I just made that example up on the fly. I mean, all I've got here are like notes. I read this stupid book, and now I'm going back at the beginning and doing these podcasts. I'm doing this on the fly, people. I'm just making this up as I go. That's how bad this is. It takes 5 seconds to come up with a total refutation of this garbage. And remember, he's supposed to be some sort of expert on the nature of belief and certainty. And yet, he's making errors that I would correct freshmen in. So, I mean, listening to some of his podcasts, I know that like he sort of dropped out of Stanford for a while and did a lot of drugs and then came back. I don't know. So, I mean, I don't know. Maybe he's just like, maybe he had shitty teachers while he was there. I mean, Stanford's got a lot of good people, but I'm sure it has some shitty people too. So either he was whacked out or didn't show up to class or took some class that didn't cover basic epistemology and doxastic theory. But he's making fundamental mistakes in an area where he claims expertise. That is not a solid foundation of credibility. And that is why I'm going through this book, even though it's quite old, 2004, 15 years old. So why would I go back to a book that old? Why not? Why wouldn't I just let Sam be Sam and deal with him as he is today? Here's why. Because this book was the foundation. This was the book that put him on the map. And as far as I can tell, listening to his podcasts, again, several dozens of hours of podcasts with him, he hasn't gotten any better on this subject. When he opens his mouth on religion, epistemology, or the epistemology of religion, he invariably spews nonsense. He is confused. He is not learned. He has not done his homework. This is one of the laziest books I've ever read. And he does not appear to have gotten any more disciplined recently, in the last 15 years, when it comes to talking about religion. Moving on. Okay, now he says that criticizing a person's faith is currently taboo in every corner of our culture. What? Guess what? Wrong. I don't even know how many years I've spent in academia. I mean, since I started my philosophy major in 1990, I guess, and I've been in academia from 1990 to 2019. 30 years in an academic environment where criticizing a person's faith was just par for the frickin' course. Where is he coming from? Where is he living? What land has he been in? What acid trip was he on when he was writing this crap? Criticizing a person's faith is currently taboo in every corner of our culture. Little snowflake. On this subject, liberals and conservatives have reached a rare consensus. Religious beliefs are simply beyond the scope of rational discourse. Yeah, okay, that's why I'm in like 7 or 8 Facebook groups where people argue religion like constantly, like all day long. Had to turn the alerts off because of all the posts in all these Facebook groups on discussing religion. And going back to 2004, yeah. Was there Facebook in 2004? Yes, there was. I think I got on Facebook in 2004. I think that was the year I joined it. I have to check. At any rate, before that, little children, we had what were called bulletin board systems. And guess what we discussed? Religion. And we criticized everybody's faith. Oh, you want to know another corner of our culture where criticizing Christians is a cornerstone? I like a little alliteration. Every dang movie and TV show you can imagine. That's an exaggeration. But it is ubiquitous. It is commonplace in movies and other visual media to criticize any kind of Orthodox Christianity. The studies have been done. Google it. Every show's got some affable genius gay guy who's everybody's best friend and who's so funny and so smart, even though that's a small portion of the population. And yet Christians, which constitute the largest portion, relevant demographic portion of our country, are either not represented on most shows, or if they are represented, they're either actual Orthodox believers and jerks, actual Orthodox believers and idiots, or you guessed it, both. Or there's the occasional trope of the liberal Christian who it's all metaphorical for them and they're okay because they don't really believe it. So this is just one of the most asinine, snowflakey comments I have ever seen. It is just ridiculous. Okay, moving on. Alrighty, we just rolled across 26 minutes. I'm going to try to keep these podcasts to around 54 minutes, divided into two 27-minute segments, so that if you're on a sort of half-hour schedule commute, you can listen to one on the way there, one on the way back, or if you've got an hour set aside, we can fit nicely into that hour. So this is the time for you to pause if you're on that half-hour schedule. Otherwise, we're going to keep on rolling. Okay, welcome back if you took a break, and here we go for the second half of the podcast. All right, so we're picking up on page 14. He goes on again to talk about the evils of religious believers, and then says there is no doubt that these developments mark the terminal phase of our credulity. Going on to say faith-based religion must suffer the same slide into obscurity as these other graveyard of bad ideas suggest. Have you ever heard of Sigmund Freud, Future of an Illusion, perhaps? Yeah, so Sigmund Freud predicted that basically in his day, religion would come to an end. Didn't happen. And you know what, Sam? It's not going to happen now either. Religion is on the rise, and rational religion is on the rise. I know you hate that. And you'd love to think that it's all fundamentalism all the time, but it's not true. It's not true. Read some Rodney Stark, for goodness sakes, if you even know who he is. All right, now we're gonna start breaking it down. Some bigger passages here. Okay, so this is after the break on page 14. Of course, people of faith fall on a continuum. Some draw solace and inspiration from a specific spiritual tradition and yet remain fully committed to tolerance and diversity, while others would burn the earth to cinders if it would put an end to heresy. Yeah. There are, in other words, religious moderates and religious extremists. And their various passions and projects should not be confused. Oh, really? We don't want to confuse moderates and extremists? I guess, I should just be thankful he said something true. It's obvious, but, at least it's true. One of the central themes of this book, listen up, boys and girls. This is Mr. Sam telling us what this one of the central themes of the book is. So he better get this right, because if he says this and then says something else later, it's kind of going to be embarrassing. That's foreshadowing. One of the central themes of this book, however, is that religious moderates are themselves bearers of a terrible dogma. What is this terrible dogma, you might ask? Good question, fair viewer or listener. They, religious moderates, imagine that the path to peace will be paved. I do like the alliteration, I got to admit. Once each of us has learned to respect the unjustified beliefs of others. It sounds, I don't know about at least it'll be peaceful. It tends towards peace. So I don't see why that's such a terrible dogma. Here's why. I hope to show that this very ideal of religious tolerance, born of the notion that every human being should be free to believe whatever he wants about God, is one of the principal forces driving us towards the abyss. Towards an abyss, kind of gloom and doom. The more I think about it, the more he actually sounds like a revivalist preacher, because at the top of page 14 in the middle, he's talking about like it's the end times, and then we're headed towards an abyss, and he's very preachy. I think he wanted to be like a wacko street preacher and didn't get his chance, and maybe he was too shy. I don't know. But note this, guys. Let's get this quote up. Let's get this whole quote up, because this is like, you're not going to believe my exposition of this if you don't read it for yourself. Okay. So this sounds to me like he rejects the notion that every human being should be free to believe whatever he wants about God. So he wants to legislate free to believe whatever he wants. He wants to legislate belief. I hope to show that the very ideal of religious tolerance, born of the notion that every human being should be free to believe whatever he wants to about God, is one of the principal forces driving us to the abyss. So how could you reject A if A is born of the notion that B? That makes no sense. So he has to reject the notion that people are free to believe what they want about God. He literally wants to coerce belief. This is unbelievable. Like, not even popes, not even like wicked popes ever want to be like, you Christians want to tell people what to believe. They certainly recommend that you believe certain things, and we'll defend them, but like, no pope was ever so bold as Uncle Sam. But let's go back and reiterate what the dogma of moderation is supposed to be. The dogma of the moderates is that the path to peace will be paved once each of us has learned respect for the unjustified beliefs of others. So the essence of religious moderation is to respect the unjustified beliefs of others, the beliefs of others that you hold to be unjustified. Okay, well, let's see if he holds that definition steady. Many religious moderates, this is over on page 15 now, many religious moderates have taken the apparent high road of pluralism, asserting the equal validity of all faiths. Well, now we're talking about a subset of religious moderates, because you certainly don't have to be a pluralist, holding that all religions are of equal validity, to respect those beliefs. There are lots of, I don't hold all religious views equally at all, but I respect most of them. I can't think of one off the top of my head that I just like categorically disrespect. But in doing so, they neglect to notice the irreducibly sectarian claims of each. What does that mean? As long as the Christian believes that only his baptized brethren will be saved on the day of judgment, he cannot possibly respect, quotes are in there, the beliefs of others. Why not? That's just, I don't know what he's trying to do by putting respect in quotes. But first of all, it's very rare that I meet a Christian who believes that only his baptized brethren will be saved on the day of judgment. First of all, most Christians believe that the Old Testament patriarchs will be in heaven. So, like Moses and Abraham and Joseph and Israel himself and people like this, like, I don't know any Christian who thinks they're going to hell. And they're not baptized brethren. Most Christians I know think that God's covenant with the Jews is God's covenant with the Jews, and that's just sort of a separate subject, or don't really know quite what to believe about that. And there are views like, I think it's called Four Views of, I think there's a book called like Four Views of the Heathen. Heathen was an old term for those who hadn't heard the gospel of Christ. There's a great deal of diversity in Christianity on this topic, but the view that only your baptized brethren are going to make it into heaven on Judgment Day is not just a minority view, it's an extreme minority view. It's a very much the minority. It's as though the man has read nothing on the topic, never talks to Christians, and did no research. Very, very frustrating, I have to say. For he knows that the flames of hell have been stoked on these very ideas, the ideas of those with whom you disagree, and await their adherence even now. Well, I also don't know very many Christians who believe that hell is literal flames, or that if there are literal flames, they're for people. They're really more for the negative ambiance, as it were. So this all this talk of like exclusivism and literalism about hellfire and all this stuff, we're only on page 15. But from beginning to painful end, like almost every atheist, internet atheist, and new atheist I've talked to, the only form of Christianity that they seem to have ever heard of or encountered in any way is basically late 20th century fundamentalism, late 20th century American fundamentalism. It's like a couple of decades in a 2,000-year tradition in one country. You just don't find that kind of fundamentalism all over the place. You find bits and pieces of this sprinkled. You've got parts where Thomas Aquinas discusses literal hellfire like that, and you've got nuanced views about baptism. But like when you find a statement in Catholicism that talks about only the baptized shall be saved, they've also got a doctrine of what's called baptism of desire, meaning if somebody, basically it's sort of, if you satisfy the counterfactual, would be baptized if they had the chance, well, they're as good as baptized. Catholics are really, it is frustrating, I'm sure, because it's really important to Catholics to affirm certain statements, but they're really into nuanced caveats, okay? Because lo and behold, they want to have nuanced beliefs, okay? So that's how that goes. But to find like the whole package of all this intolerance, young earth creationist, literal hellfire, exclusivist, 78 to 94 in America, give me a break. Update, baby, update. And yet, he goes on to close out page 15. Intellectuals as diverse as H.G. Wells, Albert Einstein, Carl Jung, Max Planck, Freeman Dyson, and Stephen Jay Gould, maybe one of those guys is a Christian, have all declared that the war between reason and faith has long been over. Yeah, they're right. It has been, because it was mostly made up to begin with. In the Norton edition of the autobiography of Charles Darwin, there's a really nice collection of essays of, this might be in the Norton Critical Edition of Origin of Species, actually. In one of the two, there's a collection of essays that are bound together with the Origin of Species, that are responses contemporary with the Origin of Species, which was published in 1859, later followed by The Descent of Man in 1871, where most Christians at that time were like, yeah, so what? It's not like it was fundamentalism out of the gate. It was an up and down kind of situation. And so, yeah, these other intellectuals, as diverse as all these guys who were like skeptics, sort of mystical Jew, liberal person inspired vaguely by Christian stories, evolutionary scientist. Yeah, intellectuals as diverse as these are agreed that the war between reason and faith has long been over. Maybe there's a reason, Sammy boy. Maybe there's a reason. Maybe it's because they're freaking right, and you won't let it die because your only concept of Christianity is fundamentalism. Get over it. He goes on this view, doesn't even really say what view it is, but the view of these guys, there's no need to have all of our beliefs about the universe cohere. Oh my gosh. This is the work of a man who has not read a shred about the subject he is speaking on. He could at least read Stephen Jay Gould, the evolutionary scientist who wrote the essay "Evolution: Fact, Not Fiction," it's called "The Fact of Evolution." It is one of the shortest, most concise and eloquent defenses of evolution in print. It's really, really kind of a classic. And his view was called NOMA, N-O-M-A. Let's get a slide up there. Non-overlapping magisterial authority, NOMA. Hopefully I got that right. If what I just said wasn't right, go with what's on the slide because I checked it. But the idea isn't that they need not cohere. It's that they of their very essence cohere because they don't overlap. Now, I don't hold this view. Okay? So I'm not defending this view because I like it, Stephen Jay Gould's NOMA view, the non-overlap view. But I at least want to get it right when I criticize it. So it's absurd to accuse Gould or any of these other guys of saying that there's no need to have your beliefs cohere, your religious beliefs and your science beliefs, because quite the opposite is true. If they don't overlap, if they don't make claims about any common subject matter, then they cannot conflict. It's logically impossible, and therefore, of logical necessity, they cohere. Again, this is simple logic and so easy to look up. You Google Stephen Jay Gould religion. You'll probably get NOMA as a top hit. We are talking in Sam Harris about a man who won't do 15 seconds worth of Google research, but he'll put it in a book. And in consequence, he gets it not just wrong, he gets it dead wrong. He gets it bass-ackwards. Ugh. All right, I had to take a quick break there. I was about to barf from how bad this is. Now, moving on to page 16, we get a little hint of the sort of what I want to call weak-ass atheism that Sam Harris subscribes to. And we're not going to talk about it yet. We're going to let the quotes accumulate. But the first example appears here where he says, there is clearly a sacred dimension to our existence, and coming to terms with it could well be the highest purpose of human life. But we will find that it requires no faith in untestable propositions for us to do that. Okay, just flag the tape. We're going back to that. Because if you're going to be an atheist, be an atheist. None of this sissy spiritual atheism BS. If I can bring myself to, we'll shred that waking up atheist spirituality book next. I don't know if I can take it though. Okay, so now we're on page 16, starting the section called The Myth of Moderation in Religion. Because remember, central tenet of the book, religious moderation, dogmatic garbage, because it allows people to believe what they want to believe. Okay, so the idea that any one of our religions represents the infallible word of the one true God requires an encyclopedic ignorance of history, mythology, and art even to be entertained. So again, people, so I taught philosophical writing for a really long time. I taught composition to 7th and 8th graders at a private school, private classical school. I taught freshmen to write philosophy papers, and I taught a professional writing class for graduate students at Baylor University for several years. This is such bad writing. You just don't say things like this. These sort of brash, just like trying to yank people's chain statements. It's not classy, and you say false things. In general, just don't say false things. So let me read that again. The idea that any one of our religions represents the infallible word of the one true God requires an encyclopedic ignorance of history, mythology, and art, even to be entertained. Okay, so let's break it down now. Encyclopedic ignorance. What does that mean? Think about it for a moment. What is encyclopedic ignorance? Well, presumably it's the opposite of encyclopedic knowledge. What is that? Encyclopedic knowledge would be systematic knowledge throughout all categories of a topic. Okay? So encyclopedic ignorance would be absence of any knowledge, systematic absence of knowledge throughout any categories. Categories being history, mythology, and art. Now, having taught classical history in both Greek and Latin and English, meaning in both the original languages, and I don't like it when it's like both, and then it's like three things. I don't like that. But forgive me, I am, after all, shooting all this on the fly. But not only have I taught ancient history from the original texts, both Greek and Latin, and taught classical mythology, and taught classical art. Actually, my camera is sitting on top of my collegiate medieval art text that I actually know inside and out. I freaking loved that class so much. But says Sam, I have to have systematic, across the board ignorance on all three of these topics to even entertain the proposition that any one of our religious traditions represents the infallible word of the one true God. And yet somehow I manage, Sam. This kind of hyperbole robs you of credibility, Sam. It just robs you of credibility. It's crazy because my son Sam's like literally over my shoulder. Not you, buddy. Love you. It's tough because my son's name is Sam. So we got stupid Sam and we got smart Sam. I'll bring him on the podcast someday. This is just credibility. This just renders your credibility to pieces to say things like this, because it shows that, I mean, it's like almost the definition of a straw man fallacy or an ad hominem. You're refusing to grant that the person who disagrees with you knows anything at all. That only the dumbest, most ignorant people could possibly disagree with you. Nobody who had any facts or knowledge or evidence or intelligence could possibly disagree with you, right? It's fiddlesticks. Is what it is. It's haughty, arrogant, egotistical, overwrought reliance on rhetoric because he's devoid of reason. I get a little riled up every now and then. Okay. As this is his reason for that stupid statement, as the beliefs, rituals, and iconography of each of our religions attest to centuries of cross-pollination among them. Well, hold on. Just a few pages ago, you were saying they were utterly inconsistent. So what is it, man? I mean, like page 13, they've got these irreducibly exclusive claims. They can't all be true. They contradict one another. They each has as a central tenet that the other is nothing but a repository of errors. I mean, give me a break. Now it's like syncretism. Centuries of cross-pollination among them. Each is literally of each of our religion attest to centuries of cross-pollination among them. Hinduism and Christianity are cross-pollinated? Really? Shintoism and Rastafarianism have centuries of cross-pollination, Sam? Really? Interesting. How about Mormonism and Buddhism? They have centuries of cross-pollination, Sam? Give me a frickin' break. It's just, it's categorical statements. Therefore, whatever their imagined source, the doctrines of modern religion are no more tenable than those which, for lack of adherence, were cast upon the scrap heap of mythology millennia ago. For there is, and you just knew it. So we're on page 6. Sam, honestly, congratulations for making it to page 16 before spewing the following kind of crap that comes out of the face of every internet atheist and so-called new atheist that I've ever run into. For there is no more evidence to justify a belief in the literal existence of Yahweh and Satan than there was to keep Zeus perched upon his mountain throne or Poseidon churning the seas. I just came really close to throwing this book. This is such a trope. This is, I don't even know which fallacy to categorize this under, but it's kind of like an intellectual ad baculum, because you're trying to disassociate somebody from their belief by trying to shame them, because we've all got the right view of Zeus and Poseidon. They don't exist, they never did, and there currently is no reason to believe they ever did. They're totally anthropomorphic. They were contingent beings, parts of a smaller universe created by the Titans, etc. I guess I don't have encyclopedic ignorance of mythology. In that I know that this other Titan thing exists. I don't remember all the details, but there's a whole layer above the Homeric pantheon, and in the Hesiod's cosmogony, there's various stories about the origins of the gods. So we all have the right view about that. We all share the view about that. And so by associating Judeo-Christian deities with these long forgotten figures of Greek mythology, you see, it's just pure rhetoric. It's just pure rhetoric. He's trying to associate the two so that people who believe the one will feel ashamed because it's being bundled with the other. Now, the reason this doesn't work on anybody of any education or self-confidence is because it's transparently just rhetoric. It's just a trick. And it might work on some people, but it don't work on yours truly. Okay, so let's go. We're on page 17 now. This is a weird claim. I think we've just got a couple of minutes left. So I'll talk about this, and then we'll end this episode. So he talks about the belief in, a certain percentage of people believe in creationism, and then therefore he says some 46% of Americans take a literalist view of creation. This means that 120 million of us place the Big Bang 2,500 years after the Babylonians and Sumerians learned how to brew beer. What? There's like, I looked at 3 different things he could be trying to say here, and none of them really make any sense. I mean, beer is like a little over 5,000 years before present, so that would be 3,000 some odd BC. Even Bishop Ussher's chronology puts the world at 4004 BC, and even then, it's not the Big Bang. People who believe in the Ussher chronology don't believe in the Big Bang, so I have no idea what's going on here. The timeline's all wrong. But suppose and a lot of young Earth creationists think the Earth is actually 6,000 or 8,000 years old. So that would get you, there's much of them think it's 8. So that gets you at least 6,000 some odd BC. And so then, even if you're like the oldest age I've heard of beer being is like 7,000 years before present. And so, if the young Earth creationist thinks the Earth is was created in 6,000 BC, 2,500 years after that would be 45. There's just no way to make sense out of this. He's just like, was he drunk when was he drinking like old beer when he wrote this? What is even happening? Anyway, we'll at least complete this sentence. And all this based on a book showing neither unity of style nor internal inconsistency, that was authored by an omniscient, omnipotent, and omnipresent deity. Well, again, no unity of style. It's 70 some odd books, bunches of authors across at least 3,000 years, 2,500 years. So he's just reiterating this stupid idea that Christians think that God sat down and like wrote a book, and the Bible just came down out of heaven, and Christians were none the wiser. So no progress towards truth. So other than like getting rid of the error. So that's all we're going to get for now. So thanks for tuning in. We'll pick up from that page next time, and we are at our time limit for today. So squeezing it into an hour, and tune in next time as we continue our ultra long form book vlog through Sam Harris's End of Faith until we get to the end of the End of Faith. Thanks. Peace out.